fate. Kodo's early life was a tale of hardship and solitude, marked by the absence of family and the relentless struggles of surviving in a world where the strong thrived and the weak were left behind. Orphaned at a young age, Kodo's earliest memories were of the cold, unfeeling streets of a city that had no place for him. Yet, even in those bleak days, there was a fire within him, a quiet resolve that set him apart from the other children who shared his fate. That resolve was what first caught the attention of Natsu, a man whose very name invoked respect and awe across the nation of Gorillist. Natsu, then the defense minister of Gorillist, was renowned not only for his unparalleled martial skills, but also for his deep understanding of leadership and strategy. His reputation as a warrior was matched only by his wisdom, and it was said that with his beloved machete in hand, Natsu could take on any number of opponents and emerge victorious. But beyond his battlefield prowess, Natsu possessed a keen eye for potential, a trait that would shape the destiny of the young boy he encountered during a routine visit to an orphanage. The day they met was like any other in the orphanage. Children played, argued, and waited for the next meal. But Natsu's gaze was drawn to one boy sitting apart from the others, his intense eyes following every movement around him with an alertness that seemed out of place in someone so young. There was something about the boy, a seriousness, a gravity that belied his years. As Natsu approached, the boy met his gaze without flinching, a silent challenge in his eyes. "What is your name, boy?" Natsu asked, his voice a deep rumble that commanded attention. "Kodo," the boy replied simply, his voice steady and calm. Natsu studied him for a long moment, then nodded, a decision forming in his mind. "You will come with me." That single moment altered Kodo's life irrevocably. Taken under Natsu's wing, Kodo left behind the uncertainty of the orphanage for a new life, one filled with purpose, discipline, and a sense of belonging he had never known. The early lessons. From the moment Kodo entered Natsu's care, his life was a rigorous regimen of training, study, and reflection. Natsu's home, though modest, was filled with the tools of a warrior, weapons of all kinds, maps, books on strategy and governance, and most importantly, a sense of order and discipline that permeated everything. Natsu began Kodo's training with the basics, physical conditioning, the proper handling of weapons, and the fundamentals of martial arts. But his lessons extended far beyond the physical. Every movement, every exercise was accompanied by a lesson in philosophy, politics, or military strategy. Natsu believed that a true warrior was not just a master of the body but also of the mind and spirit. One evening, after an exhausting day of training, Natsu and Kodo sat by the fire, the light casting long shadows across the room. Natsu, as was his custom, had prepared a simple meal of grilled meat and cainias, the nutritious seeds of the anara tree that were a staple in their diet. As they ate, Natsu spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Kodo, do you know why we train as we do? Why I push you so hard?" Kodo, though tired, looked at Natsu with clear eyes. "To make me strong. To prepare me for battle." Natsu nodded but added, "Yes, but it is more than that. Strength alone is not enough. A warrior's true power lies in his understanding of himself and the world around him. The body must be strong, but the mind must be stronger." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You must learn to see beyond the immediate, beyond the physical confrontation. True victory is achieved not just with the blade, but with the mind. Politics, strategy, the understanding of power, these are as much weapons as any machete or axe." Kodo absorbed his mentor's words, the seeds of deeper understanding taking root in his young mind. Over the years, Natsu continued to challenge Kodo, both physically and mentally. They would spend hours discussing the great military campaigns of history, dissecting the strategies of past leaders, and analyzing the political moves that shaped the course of nations. "Every battle, Kodo, is won or lost before it is ever fought," Natsu would say, his voice imbued with the weight of experience. "The decisions made in the halls of power are as crucial as those made on the battlefield. You must learn to navigate both arenas if you are to be a true leader." The martial challenge. As Kodo grew, his physical and mental prowess developed rapidly under Natsu's guidance. The boy who had once been orphaned and alone transformed into a formidable young warrior, his skills honed to a razor's edge. Yet, despite his progress, Kodo knew that he still had much to learn, particularly when it came to matching his mentor in combat. Natsu would often challenge Kodo to sparring matches, using these sessions to teach him not just technique but also the importance of strategy and adaptability. In the beginning, Kodo found himself outmatched, struggling to keep up with Natsu's speed, strength, and tactical brilliance. During one such match, Natsu disarmed Kodo with a swift, fluid motion, sending the young warrior sprawling to the ground. As Kodo looked up at his mentor, his breath coming in ragged gasps, Natsu stood over him, his machete held loosely at his side. "Do you know why you lost, Kodo?" Natsu asked, his tone neither harsh nor mocking. Kodo shook his head, frustration evident in his expression. "You're faster, stronger. I couldn't keep up." Natsu extended a hand, helping Kodo to his feet. "Speed and strength are important, yes. But you lost because you were too focused on my movements, on what you could see. You didn't anticipate, didn't think ahead. You must learn to see the battlefield as a whole, to predict your opponent's actions before they make them." He paused, letting his words sink in. "In a fight, you must be like water, adaptable, flowing, able to change your approach in an instant. The greatest warriors are those who can turn their weaknesses into strengths, who can adapt to any situation." Kodo nodded, determination shining in his eyes. He would not be discouraged by his losses, rather, he would use them as stepping stones on his path to greatness. Over time, Kodo's skills continued to improve. He learned to anticipate Natsu's moves, to read the subtle shifts in his stance, the flicker of intention in his eyes. Their sparring matches became increasingly intense, each one a test not just of physical ability but of strategy and mental acuity. Then came the day when Kodo finally fought Natsu to a draw. It was a grueling match, both warriors giving their all, their movements a blur of speed and precision. As the fight ended, both stood panting, their weapons held at the ready, neither willing to admit defeat. Finally, Natsu lowered his machete, a rare smile playing on his lips. "You've come a long way, Kodo. Today, you fought not just with your body, but with your mind. Remember this feeling, this sense of balance between thought and action. It will serve you well in the future." Lessons in leadership. As Kodo matured, Natsu's lessons began to focus more on leadership and the responsibilities that came with power. Natsu, now the president of Gorillist, had long understood that true leadership was about more than just command and control. It was about understanding the needs of the people, making decisions that served the greater good, and balancing strength with compassion. One evening, as they sat in Natsu's study surrounded by maps and books, Kodo posed a question that had been on his mind for some time. "Father," he began hesitantly, "how do you know when to lead with strength and when to show mercy? How do you balance the two?" Natsu looked up from the document he was studying, his expression thoughtful. "That is a question every leader must grapple with, Kodo. There is no simple answer, for every situation is different. But I can tell you this, strength without compassion is tyranny, and compassion without strength is weakness. A true leader must possess both, and know when to wield each." He rose from his seat, walking over to the window that overlooked the training grounds. "When you lead, you must always be mindful of the consequences of your actions, not just in the moment, but in the long term. Every decision you make, every order you give, will ripple through the lives of those you lead. You must be strong enough to make the hard decisions, but also wise enough to temper that strength with understanding." Kodo listened intently, absorbing every word. He understood that Natsu was not just speaking from experience, but from a deep sense of responsibility. The weight of leadership was a heavy burden, one that required both strength and wisdom to bear. "Remember, Kodo," Natsu continued, turning to face him, "a leader's true power comes not from their ability to command, but from their ability to inspire. When your people believe in you, when they trust you to act in their best interests, they will follow you through any storm. But that trust must be earned through your actions, your integrity, and your commitment to their well-being." Kodo nodded, the lessons taking root in his mind. He knew that the path of leadership would not be easy, but with Natsu's guidance, he felt prepared to walk it. The final challenge. As Kodo reached adulthood, he had become a warrior and leader in his own right, respected by those who knew him and feared by those who opposed him. But there was one final challenge that Natsu had prepared for him, a test that would determine whether Kodo was truly ready to step into the role of leader. One morning, Natsu summoned Kodo to the training grounds, his expression serious. "Kodo, today we will have one last match, no holding back. This is your final test. Are you ready?" Kodo nodded, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had faced Natsu many times before, but he knew that this match would be different. It would be a test not just of his skills, but of everything he had learned from his mentor over the years. The two warriors squared off, their weapons at the ready. For a moment, they simply stood there, each assessing the other, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, in a blur of motion, they clashed, their weapons ringing out as they met. The fight was intense, each move calculated, each strike deliberate. Kodo fought with a calm focus, drawing on the lessons Natsu had taught him about adaptability and strategy. He anticipated Natsu's moves, countering with precision and skill. It was clear that he had grown into a formidable warrior, one who could stand toe-to-toe with the greatest fighters of the age. But Natsu was no ordinary opponent. He fought with the experience and wisdom of a lifetime, his movements fluid and unpredictable. Every time Kodo thought he had an opening, Natsu would shift, turning the tide of the battle in an instant. For what felt like hours, they fought, neither willing to give an inch. Sweat dripped from their brows, their breaths came in ragged gasps, but still, they pressed on, driven by a deep respect for each other and the knowledge that this fight was about more than just physical prowess. Finally, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the training ground, the two warriors found themselves locked in a stalemate. Both were exhausted, their weapons barely raised, but neither was willing to admit defeat. Natsu, his voice filled with pride, finally spoke. "You've done well, Kodo. You've proven yourself not just as a warrior, but as a leader. Today, we are equals. Remember this moment, for it marks the beginning of your own journey." Kodo, still catching his breath, nodded. He understood the significance of Natsu's words. The journey that had begun in the orphanage had brought him to this moment, standing as an equal with the man who had shaped his destiny. As they lowered their weapons and clasped hands, Kodo felt a deep sense of gratitude and determination. He knew that the path ahead would be filled with challenges, but with Natsu's teachings as his foundation, he was ready to face whatever came his way. The legacy continues. Kodo's journey was far from over, but he knew that with Natsu's guidance and the lessons he had learned, he was prepared to step into his role as a leader. He would carry forward the values of strength, wisdom, and compassion that Natsu had instilled in him, and he would lead with the integrity and resolve that had been the hallmark of his mentor's own leadership. As Kodo stood on the precipice of his future, he knew that the lessons of martial arts, politics, and military philosophy that Natsu had imparted would guide him through the challenges ahead. And though Natsu would no longer be there to fight by his side, his presence would always be felt in the principles and values that Kodo would carry with him. The legacy of Natsu, and the lessons he had taught Kodo, would continue to shape the destiny of Gorillist as the young warrior stepped into the role he had been groomed for. The future was uncertain, but Kodo knew that with Natsu's teachings as his compass, there was no obstacle he could not overcome, no adversary he could not vanquish, and no dream too lofty to achieve. The privileged upbringing. Ruta's life was one of privilege, marked by the comforts of wealth and the prestige of being the son of Major General Hurus, one of the most revered military figures in the land. Born into a world where excellence was expected, Ruta's upbringing was defined by rigorous discipline and high expectations. From an early age, Ruta was groomed to be more than just a warrior. He was destined to be a leader, a figurehead who would one day inherit his father's legacy. Unlike Kodo, who rose from humble beginnings under the guidance of Natsu, Ruta was raised in the lap of luxury, surrounded by the trappings of power and influence. His childhood home was a grand estate, filled with the relics of his family's storied history, portraits of ancestors who had fought in legendary battles, shelves lined with books on strategy and governance, and walls adorned with the weapons of war. It was an environment that cultivated a deep respect for tradition and a sense of duty that was instilled in Ruta from the moment he could walk. Despite the privilege that surrounded him, Ruta's life was far from easy. His father, Hurus, was a man of immense discipline, and he demanded nothing less from his son. Ruta's days were regimented, beginning before dawn with martial arts training under the watchful eye of Master Bara, a martial arts master known for his strict methods and unparalleled skill. The afternoons were reserved for lessons in military strategy and political philosophy, taught by Hurus himself. Evenings were spent in solitary study, where Ruta devoured ancient texts, eager to absorb the knowledge that would one day make him a formidable leader. But it was during these rigorous training sessions and intellectual discussions that Hurus began to notice something troubling in his son. There was a sharpness in Ruta's intellect, a keen understanding of power that bordered on the ruthless. It was not uncommon for Ruta to question the necessity of mercy, to argue the efficiency of harsh measures in maintaining order. These were the traits of a brilliant mind, but also the traits of a potential autocrat. Hurus, proud of his son's abilities yet deeply concerned by his growing authoritarian tendencies, knew he had to guide Ruta carefully. He had to teach him not just the art of war, but the responsibilities that came with power, the importance of balance, and the perils of tyranny. It was a delicate task, one that would shape the future of not just Ruta, but the entire nation. Conversations with Hurus, lessons in politics and power. Hurus believed that leadership was an art as much as it was a science. His lessons to Ruta were not confined to the classroom, they took place everywhere, during their morning walks through the estate's expansive gardens, in the quiet moments after dinner, and even in the midst of military exercises. Hurus sought to impart not just knowledge but wisdom, the kind that could only come from experience. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Hurus and Ruta sat in the study, the room dimly lit by the flickering flames of the fireplace. Hurus observed his son, who was intently reading a tome on the strategies of ancient generals. Ruta, Hurus began, his voice steady but carrying a weight of concern. What do you believe is the most important quality in a leader? Ruta looked up from his book, his sharp eyes meeting his father's. Decisiveness, he answered without hesitation. A leader must be able to make swift decisions and stand by them, even in the face of opposition. Hurus nodded slowly. Decisiveness is indeed crucial, but it must be tempered with wisdom. A leader who acts without considering the consequences, who values efficiency over humanity, risks becoming a tyrant. Ruta frowned, his brow furrowing in thought. But isn't it better to be feared than loved? Fear commands respect and ensures order. Love is fickle and can lead to complacency. Hurus sighed, seeing the dangerous seed of authoritarianism growing in his son. Respect born of fear is fragile, Ruta. It can turn to hatred and rebellion at the first sign of weakness. True respect, the kind that endures, is built on trust and mutual understanding. People must believe that their leader acts in their best interest, not just in the pursuit of power. But what if the people's best interests require harsh measures? Ruta countered. What if leniency leads to chaos? Hurus leaned forward, his gaze intense. Then the leader must bear the burden of those measures with a heavy heart, not a sense of pride. A true leader does not revel in the power to punish. He uses it as a last resort, with the understanding that every action has consequences. Power is not just about control, Ruta. It is about responsibility. The greater the power, the greater the responsibility to use it wisely. Ruta fell silent, the weight of his father's words sinking in. Hurus could see the conflict in his son's eyes, a battle between his natural inclinations towards authority and the lessons of compassion and restraint that Hurus was trying to instill. Remember this, Ruta, Hurus said quietly, a leader's legacy is not measured by the power he wielded, but by the lives he touched and the justice he upheld. Power without compassion is tyranny, and tyranny breeds only resentment and rebellion. Training with Bara, the path of the warrior. While Hurus focused on shaping Ruta's mind and moral compass, Master Bara was responsible for honing his body and martial skills. Bara was a man of few words, but his presence alone commanded respect. His approach to training was rigorous, demanding both physical prowess and mental discipline. Bara believed that true mastery of martial arts was not just about technique, but about understanding the philosophy behind each movement. From the age of 5, Ruta was placed under Bara's strict regimen. Days began before the sun rose, with hours of intense physical training, running, lifting, and practicing forms. Bara was relentless, pushing Ruta to his limits, but it was clear that he saw great potential in the boy. Despite the grueling nature of the training, Ruta never complained. He embraced the challenge, driven by an inner fire to prove himself. One morning, after an especially intense sparring session, Bara called for a break. As Ruta caught his breath, Bara approached him, his expression inscrutable. "You are improving, Ruta," Bara said, his voice a low rumble. "But do you understand why we train this way?" Ruta nodded, still panting. "To become stronger, faster, to master the techniques." Bara shook his head. "Strength and speed are important, but they are not the essence of martial arts. What we seek is balance, balance between body and mind, between aggression and restraint." Ruta frowned, not fully understanding. "But isn't the goal to defeat your opponent? To be the best?" Bara's eyes narrowed. "Defeating your opponent is only one aspect of martial arts. The true goal is mastery over oneself. It is not enough to win a fight, you must win with honor, with control. Every movement, every strike must be purposeful. Reckless aggression leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to defeat." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "Martial arts is not just about combat. It is a way of life, a philosophy. The skills you learn here are not just for the battlefield, they are for every aspect of your life. They teach you discipline, patience, and humility. These are the qualities of a true warrior and of a true leader." Ruta listened intently, absorbing the wisdom of his mentor. He had always seen martial arts as a means to an end, a way to prove his worth and assert his dominance. But Bara's words challenged him to think deeper, to see the art as more than just physical prowess. "Remember, Ruta," Bara said, his voice softer now, "the greatest battles are fought within. To master the martial arts, you must first master yourself. Only then can you lead others with true strength." The internal struggle. As Ruta grew older, the lessons from Hurus and Bara began to intertwine, shaping his understanding of the world and his place within it. He was no longer just a child of privilege, but a young man on the cusp of greatness or disaster. The conflicting teachings of his father and mentor weighed heavily on him as he struggled to reconcile his natural inclinations with the ideals they were trying to instill. There were moments when Ruta felt the pull of authoritarianism, the temptation to seize control and impose order with an iron fist. He had seen the inefficiencies of leniency, the chaos that could arise from too much freedom. It frustrated him, and he often found himself questioning the need for compassion when strength could so easily command obedience. But then, he would remember his father's words, the cautionary tales of leaders who had fallen to their own hubris, and the wisdom of Bara's teachings on balance and restraint. These lessons acted as a counterweight, preventing him from tipping too far into the abyss of tyranny. Hurus was not blind to the struggle within his son. He could see the tension in Ruta's eyes, the battle between ambition and morality. It was a familiar struggle, one that Hurus himself had faced in his youth. But Hurus knew that Ruta's path would be his own to walk. All he could do was guide him and hope that the lessons he imparted would be enough to steer Ruta away from the darker paths that lay before him. One evening, as they sat together in the study, Hurus decided it was time to address the issue directly. "Ruta," Hurus began, his tone serious, "I see the conflict within you. You are torn between the desire for control and the principles of justice and compassion that I have tried to teach you." Ruta looked up, his expression guarded. "I don't see why there needs to be a conflict, Father. Control ensures stability. Without it, chaos reigns." Hurus nodded slowly, choosing his words carefully. Control does ensure stability, but at what cost? If you rule with an iron fist, you may keep order, but you will also sow fear and resentment. People will follow you out of necessity, not loyalty. And when your power falters, they will turn against you. But isn't fear the most reliable way to maintain power? Ruta pressed, his voice tinged with frustration. Fear is powerful, yes, Horus agreed, but it is also fragile. It can be broken, and when it is, the backlash can be catastrophic. True power, Ruta, comes from respect and trust. It comes from leading with a sense of justice and fairness. When people believe in you, when they see that you act in their best interest, they will follow you willingly, not because they fear you, but because they trust you. Ruta was silent for a long time, his mind grappling with the conflicting ideas. Horus could see the wheels turning, the struggle to reconcile his natural inclinations with the wisdom his father was trying to impart. "Father," Ruta said finally, his voice quiet but firm, "I understand what you're saying. But I can't help but see the inefficiency in compassion, the weakness in leniency. The world is harsh, and sometimes harsh measures are necessary." Horus met his son's gaze, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps you are right, Ruta. The world is harsh, and there are times when tough decisions must be made. But remember this, the true measure of a leader is not how they wield power, but how they balance it with wisdom and restraint. You must always ask yourself, not just what can be done, but what should be done." The final lesson. As Ruta continued to train under Bara and study under his father, he grew into a formidable young man, respected for his intellect and feared for his martial prowess. But the internal struggle remained, a constant battle between his natural inclinations towards control and the lessons of compassion and justice that his father and mentor tried to instill. It was during one of his final training sessions with Bara that Ruta experienced a breakthrough, a moment of clarity that would shape his understanding of leadership and power. The session began like any other, with rigorous physical exercises followed by sparring. But as they moved into the sparring portion, Bara suddenly changed tactics, fighting with a level of intensity that Ruta had not encountered before. Bara's strikes were faster, his movements more aggressive. Ruta found himself on the defensive, struggling to keep up. He had always been able to hold his own against Bara, but today was different. It was as if Bara was testing him, pushing him to his limits. As the sparring continued, Ruta felt a surge of frustration. He was trying to match Bara's intensity, but every time he thought he had an opening, Bara would counter with a precision that left Ruta off balance. The frustration grew into anger, and Ruta began to fight more recklessly, abandoning the techniques he had been taught in favor of raw aggression. It was a mistake. Bara capitalized on Ruta's loss of control, landing a series of strikes that left Ruta on the ground, breathless and humiliated. As Ruta lay there, panting and seething, Bara knelt beside him, his expression stern. "Do you see what happened, Ruta?" Bara asked, his voice calm but firm. Ruta nodded, too frustrated to speak. "You lost control," Bara continued. "You let your emotions dictate your actions. You abandoned everything I've taught you about balance and discipline. That's why you lost." Ruta clenched his fists, anger still simmering beneath the surface. "But you were pushing me harder than ever before. I had to fight back." "Yes," Bara agreed, "I was pushing you. But that was the test. I wanted to see how you would respond under pressure. And you failed, Ruta. Not because you weren't strong enough, but because you lost control." Bara stood, offering Ruta a hand to help him up. Martial arts, like leadership, requires control. Control over your body, your mind, and your emotions. When you lose control, you make mistakes. And in battle, those mistakes can be fatal. Ruta took Bara's hand, pulling himself to his feet. He felt the sting of defeat, but also the weight of Bara's words. "The same applies to leadership," Bara continued. "If you let your emotions dictate your decisions, if you rule with anger and fear, you will make mistakes. And those mistakes will have consequences, not just for you, but for everyone who follows you." Ruta nodded, the lesson finally sinking in. He had always seen control as a means to an end, a way to assert his dominance and achieve his goals. The road ahead. As Ruta stood on the precipice of adulthood, he knew that the lessons he had learned from his father and mentor would guide him on his path. The internal struggle between his natural inclinations and the teachings of Horus and Bera would continue, but he felt more prepared to face it. Ruta's upbringing, though marked by privilege and power, had also been a journey of self-discovery and growth. He had been shaped by the wisdom of his father, who had taught him the importance of balancing strength with compassion, and by the discipline of Bera, who had shown him the value of control and restraint. But the road ahead was still uncertain. As Ruta prepared to step into the world as a leader, he knew that the challenges he would face would test everything he had learned. The temptation to seize control, to impose order with an iron fist, would always be there. But he also knew that the true measure of a leader was not in their ability to command, but in their ability to inspire, to lead with wisdom, and to act with integrity. With Horus and Bera's teachings as his foundation, Ruta was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The future was full of possibilities, both for greatness and for peril. But Ruta was determined to walk the path with the lessons of his father and mentor guiding him, striving to be the leader they had taught him to be. As he looked out over the horizon, Ruta knew that his journey was just beginning. The challenges of leadership, the complexities of power, and the responsibilities that came with it all lay before him. But with the wisdom of Horus and Bera as his compass, he felt ready to face the world and carve his own path, one that would honor the legacy of his father while forging a new future for himself and his people.